From now on, she said, her voice brittle with false confidence, my fiancé will control your spending. The words hung in the air, a declaration of war disguised as financial prudence. They thought they were seizing my purse strings. The poor, foolish children. They had no idea I was about to seize their entire world. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. The air in my study is my own creation. It is filtered twice, chilled to a precise 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and carries the faint, clean scent of old paper and leather from the thousands of first edition books that line the walls from floor to ceiling. The room is my sanctum, the command center of a global logistics empire, and its atmosphere is a reflection of my mind, controlled, cool, and silent. It was into this silence that they brought their clumsy, ill-conceived declaration of war. My daughter, Nia, sat in one of the twin leather armchairs opposite my desk, her posture a study in forced rigidity. She was twisting the engagement ring on her finger, a 3-carat flawless diamond from a private jeweler in Antwerp, a ring I had of course paid for, routing the funds through a trust account so she could believe the fiction that Damien had acquired it himself. Damien, he sat beside her, the picture of ambitious satisfaction, wearing a suit that was a shade too tight in the shoulders, a telltale sign of off-the-rack aspiration. He smiled at me, a confident, predatory smile he had likely practiced in the mirror, believing it made him look like a peer. It did not. It made him look like a child playing dress-up in his father's clothes. They had requested this meeting, a formality I found both irritating and amusing. They had come to my fortress, to my seat of power, to tell me the terms of my own surrender. After a long, uncomfortable silence, a silence I deliberately stretched to amplify their nervousness, Nia finally took a breath. She drew herself up, a puppet puffing up its chest before reciting its lines. Mother, she began, her voice brittle with a confidence she did not possess. Damien and I have been going over the quarterly disbursements from the trust. I remained silent, my hands steepled before me on the vast, uncluttered expanse of my 19th-century mahogany desk. I simply watched them, my expression placid. I find that silence is often the most effective tool of interrogation. People rush to fill it, and in their haste, they reveal their weaknesses. Damien, seeing Nia falter, stepped in smoothly. What Nia means to say, Serafina, he began, the use of my first name a calculated impertinence, is that we've identified certain inefficiencies, areas of expenditure that are frankly unsustainable for a woman in your position. He held up a tablet, its screen glowing with charts and graphs. My life, reduced to a series of spreadsheets. I recognized the formatting. It was the standard template for a junior analyst's pitch. He had put as much effort into analyzing my life as he would a mid-cap stock. For example, he continued, tapping the screen, the monthly upkeep for the botanical gardens at the estate, the donations to the opera, the retainer for the personal historian, who archives the family's records. These are sentimental costs, not investments. They yield no tangible return. The audacity of it was breathtaking. He, a boy who had come from nothing, was lecturing me, Serafina Covington, on the nature of tangible returns. I who had built a global empire from a single resting warehouse inherited from my father. I who understood that power. True power was not just in what you owned, but in the culture you curated, the history you wrote, the beauty you controlled. The opera was not an expense, it was a networking hub. The gardens were not a hobby, they were a statement of dominance over nature itself. The historian was not a luxury, he was the man who ensured the Covington legacy would be recorded for 1,000 years. But I said nothing, I let him speak. I let him lay out his entire pathetic strategy. Finally the moment came. Nia, seeing her fiancé's presentation conclude, took her cue. She looked at a point just over my left shoulder, unable to meet my gaze. From now on, she said, her voice wavering for just a fraction of a second before hardening into a rehearsed resolve, my fiancé will control your spending. The words hung in the air. A declaration of war disguised as financial prudence. A coup d'etat wrapped in the language of fiscal responsibility. They thought they were seizing my purse strings, putting me, the matriarch, on an allowance. They saw an aging lioness ready to be pensioned off while they feasted on her legacy. A long, profound silence followed. I let it settle, let them feel the weight of their treason. Nia began to squirm. Even Damien's confident smile began to look strained. Then, I smiled. It was a serene, untroubled smile. A smile of perfect, absolute calm. The smile of a grandmaster who sees the entire board, who has already calculated the game out to its inevitable crushing conclusion. Very well, I said, my voice a soft melodic purr. If you believe this is what's best for the family's financial health, I will of course defer to your judgment. Send me the necessary forms, Damien. I look forward to a more optimized future. The relief that washed over their faces was comical. Negia's tense shoulders slumped. Damien's smile became genuine, triumphant. They had done it. They had conquered the great Serafina Covington. The poor, foolish children. They had no idea. They thought this was their victory. They couldn't comprehend that they had just willingly, eagerly, stepped into a cage of my own design. The game had just begun. The first week of the new regime was a performance of meticulous compliance on my part. I played the role they had assigned to me, the chastened, slightly befuddled retiree, a titan of industry now grappling with the baffling complexities of a household budget. It was a role I found surprisingly enjoyable, a new strategic challenge. Deception, after all, is merely the art of managing the perceptions of others. On Monday, Damien received his first requisition request from my personal assistant. It was for the renewal of a subscription to a quarterly journal on ancient Roman pottery, a passion of mine. The cost was a trivial $200. An email from Damien arrived an hour later, addressed to my assistant but clearly intended for my eyes. Please have Mrs. Covington provide a one-page summary justifying this expense and its relevance to the family's core financial objectives. I instructed my assistant to thank him for his diligence and to cancel the subscription. I then made a call to a private dealer in London and purchased a newly discovered Roman vase for $200,000, using a discretionary account Damien knew nothing about. On Wednesday, I submitted a request to make my annual donation to a scholarship fund for underprivileged music students. It was a sum I had donated every year for 2 decades. Damien's response was a masterwork of condescending corporate jargon. While philanthropic optics are important, he wrote, I believe we should pivot our charitable strategy towards more synergistic opportunities. I'm tabling this for now, pending a full review. He was not just controlling my spending. He was trying to appropriate my legacy of philanthropy and rebrand it as his own. I in turn received a call from the head of the music school, a man I had known for years. I assured him the school would not suffer. I tripled my donation, again using funds from an account that was a ghost in his limited system. Damien, insulated by his own arrogance, saw none of this. He saw only the small, predictable expense reports that crossed his desk. He saw my quiet compliance. He saw my cancelled subscriptions and tabled donations, and he mistook these things for victory. He would sit at the head of my dinner table, pontificating about fiscal discipline, while Nia looked on with an expression of profound, liberating pride. He's brilliant, isn't he, Mother? She said to me one evening. As we sat in the drawing room, Damien was on the phone in the hall, arguing with the credit card company about a late fee on one of my accounts that his own oversight had caused. He's not afraid to make the tough decisions. It's what the family needs. He is very decisive, I agreed, my voice a model of maternal deference. I did not say that the decisions he was making were irrelevant, microscopic adjustments to a machine whose true workings he could not even begin to comprehend. He was like a child who had been given a toy steering wheel in a car, believing he was the one driving, unaware of the parents' hands firmly on the real wheel. Their happiness was almost painful to watch. It was the bliss of the profoundly ignorant. Nia blossomed under the illusion of her newfound freedom. She had finally, in her mind, stepped out from under my shadow. She had a partner, an equal, who could stand up to the great matriarch. She began planning their wedding with a fervor she had never shown before, holding meetings with caterers and florists, all the while dutifully submitting the expense projections to Damien for his approval. Damien, for his part, swelled with a self-importance that was almost comical. He began to adopt the mannerisms he associated with power. He spoke more slowly, leaving dramatic pauses. He adopted a new, more serious style of dress, all dark suits and severe ties. He started referring to the estate staff as my staff. He was not just managing my finances, he was trying on my life like a costume, convinced it was a perfect fit. I watched it all, a serene, observant ghost in my own home. I allowed them their small, pathetic victories. I complimented Damien on his astute decision to switch the household to a cheaper brand of bottled water. I praised Nia for her fiscally responsible choice of a less extravagant flower arrangement for the foyer. I played my part, the gentle fading queen mother gracefully ceding her throne. And all the while, in the dead of night, in the silent glowing heart of my true office, a world away from the drawing room charade. The real work was being done. The gears of my empire were turning, not to manage household expenses, but to execute a corporate intelligence operation of such scale and precision that it would have humbled a small nation. Damien was busy counting my pennies. I was busy acquiring the price of his soul. The charade ended the moment the door to my real office closed behind me. This room, unlike the elegant book-lined study I used for family matters, was a masterpiece of cold, brutalist efficiency. It was located in the sub-basement of the estate, encased in a foot of steel-reinforced concrete, and shielded against all forms of electronic surveillance. It was a command bunker, the true nexus of my global power. There were no family photos here, no priceless antiques. There was only a single, semi-circular desk facing a wall of floor-to-ceiling monitors, displaying everything from global shipping routes and real-time market data to satellite weather patterns. I sat in the command chair, the leather cool against my skin. The performance of the frail, compliant matriarch fell away, replaced by the cold, analytical focus of the CEO and strategist. The problem was Damien Vance. The objective was his total unconditional subjugation. The first step was intelligence. I did not use Google. I did not hire a common private investigator. I engaged the services of a firm known only as the Vespers. They were not a company, they were a legend in the dark, whispered corners of corporate espionage. Their client list was a secret, but it was rumored to include governments, oligarchs, and the kind of global corporations that operate above the law. They were ghosts, digital archaeologists who could excavate a person's life down to the bedrock of their most deeply buried secrets. Their services were astronomically expensive. I paid them without a second thought. My instructions to them, delivered via a multi-encrypted single-use communication channel, were simple and absolute. The target is Damien Vance, I wrote. I want a complete forensic life audit. I am not interested in rumors or suspicions. I want verifiable, documented proof. I want his academic records, from kindergarten to his MBA. I want his complete employment history, including the real reasons for any departures. I want his financial records, every bank account, every credit card, every loan, every hidden offshore entity. I want to know his digital footprint, every deleted social media profile, every private message, every post on every obscure forum. I want his social network mapped. His friends, his enemies, his ex-lovers, his estranged family. I want to know who he owes, both money and favors. I want to know where every skeleton is buried, and I want the key to every closet. The budget is unlimited, the timeline is immediate. Discretion is paramount. I sent the message in the 7-figure wire transfer for the retainer. The response came back 60 seconds later. It was a single word: acknowledged. The Vespers were a black box. I would not hear from them again until the work was done. But I knew that at that very moment, a silent, invisible army of researchers, hackers and social engineers had been mobilized across the globe. They would be pulling university transcripts from dusty archives, bribing disgruntled former colleagues, and peeling back the layers of Damien's carefully constructed digital persona. They would operate with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a virus, and he would never even know he was infected. While they worked, I began my own more subtle investigation. I had access to a different kind of data. As the head of one of the world's largest logistics empires, I controlled a significant portion of the arteries of global trade. My servers processed terabytes of data every hour on the movement of goods, commodities, and raw materials. This data gave me a unique predictive insight into market fluctuations. I could see a supply chain disruption forming weeks before it hit the financial news. I could anticipate a commodity shortage before the traders in New York had even had their morning coffee. I tasked my top data science team with a new confidential project. Their objective to analyze Damien's known investment patterns and cross-reference them with my proprietary supply chain data. I wanted to find the exact point of intersection between his financial world and my physical one. I wanted to identify the precise hidden vulnerability in his portfolio. The one place where a subtle nudge from my world could trigger a catastrophic collapse in his. As I sat there bathed in the cool blue glow of the data streams, I felt a profound sense of calm. This was my element. The world of emotion and family drama was a swamp of irrational variables. But this was a world of pure, clean data, a world of action and consequence, of leverage and control. Upstairs in the world of light and air, Damien was probably reviewing my request for a new set of gardening gloves. feeling powerful, feeling triumphant. He was a man who thought he had captured a queen in a game of checkers. He had no concept of the three-dimensional chess game I was playing, a game whose board was the entire world, and whose pieces were an invisible army of spies and a global river of data. He was not a player, he was merely the board. The first report from the Vespers arrived on my secure server precisely 2 weeks later. It was not a summary, it was a deluge. A multi-gigabyte encrypted dossier so comprehensive it was a testament to their terrifying efficiency. I spent an entire night in my command bunker, methodically dissecting the life of Damien Vance. What I found was not a monster, not a criminal mastermind. What I found was far more useful. A fraud. A man whose entire existence was a meticulously constructed house of cards. The foundations were laid in his youth. His official biography, the one he had fed to Nia and to the world, was of a brilliant, self-made man who had overcome a modest upbringing through sheer grit and intelligence. The Vespers report painted a different picture. They had uncovered his sealed juvenile records. A charge for plagiarism in high school, dismissed after his parents had pleaded with the school board. An accusation of cheating on his college entrance exams, which was dropped due to a lack of concrete evidence, but which had resulted in a quiet, unrecorded suspension. The genius was not in his intellect, but in his early mastery of manipulating systems and escaping consequences. His academic record was a masterpiece of embellishment. He had claimed to have graduated summa cum laude from his undergraduate business program. The official transcript which the Vespers had somehow procured showed he had graduated with a respectable but far from brilliant 3.2 GPA. The prestigious internship at a top-tier investment bank in London, the one he used as the cornerstone of his resume, it had never happened. He had spent that summer working as a junior teller at a suburban bank branch. The Vespers provided a copy of his employment record and a sworn notarized affidavit from his former branch manager. His professional life was built on the same rotten foundations. His rapid rise at his current investment firm was not due to his own success, but to his skill at appropriating the successes of others. The Vespers had conducted discreet interviews with 2 of his former colleagues who had left the firm under mysterious circumstances. Their stories were identical. Damien would be assigned to a team, contribute very little, and then, in the final stages of a successful project, he would maneuver himself into the client-facing role, subtly reframing the narrative to position himself as the architect of the victory. He didn't steal ideas, he stole credit, a far more insidious and harder to prove form of theft. But the most damning revelations were financial. Damien projected an image of a savvy, successful investor who was steadily building his own fortune. The reality was a portrait of a desperate gambler. The Vespers had unspooled his entire network of personal finances, including a series of shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. He wasn't building wealth, he was juggling debt. He was using undeclared leverage to make a series of incredibly high-risk speculative trades in the volatile world of commodity futures. A single significant market downturn in the wrong sector would not just hurt him, it would wipe him out completely, exposing him as a reckless amateur who had been lying to his firm and his clients. I leaned back in my chair, the dossier open on the central monitor. It was more beautiful than any work of art. It was a complete systematic map of my enemy's weaknesses. Every lie, every embellishment, every hidden debt, was a pressure point, a place where I could apply force. He was not the brilliant liberator Nia believed him to be. He was a hollow man, a confection of ambition and deceit. He hadn't fallen in love with my daughter. He had targeted her. He saw the Covington name not as a family but as the ultimate bailout, the final unassailable safety net for his lifetime of risk and fraud. He wanted to control my spending not to protect the family's legacy, but to gain access to the deep limitless river of my capital to cover his own catastrophic failings. A cold, clean anger settled in my gut, not the hot, messy anger of personal betrayal, but the focused, strategic anger of a sovereign whose borders have been breached. He had not just deceived my daughter, he had attempted to compromise my empire. He had mistaken my home for a bank, and my family for a mark. The Vespers had given me the ammunition, my own data science team had given me the weapon. They had cross-referenced his high-risk trades with my proprietary logistics data, and they had found it. A single perfect point of vulnerability. He was heavily, foolishly invested in coffee bean futures, betting on a stable harvest. My data, however, showed something different. A quiet, little-reported fungal outbreak in a key growing region in South America, a coming dockworkers' strike in a major European port, a sudden shift in shipping container allocation. The market didn't know it yet, but the price of coffee was about to fall off a cliff. I looked at the dossier. I looked at the market data. The house of cards was built. The wind was at my command. All I had to do was choose the right moment to exhale. With the dossier from the Vespers providing me with a complete schematic of Damien's fraudulent life, the next phase of my operation began. It was time to move from intelligence gathering to strategic positioning. I needed to inflate his ego, to elevate him to a height from which his fall would be all the more spectacular and irreversible. I needed to make him believe he was not just a player in the great game, but its master. The setting for this gambit was a place I knew well, the hushed, wood-paneled dining room of the Olympian Club, a private establishment so exclusive it made the very concept of a waiting list seem vulgar. It was a place where fortunes were made and unmade over $100 salads and $1,000 bottles of wine. It was the natural habitat of the men who ran Damien's world. I arranged a lunch. My guests were the two senior managing partners of Damien's investment firm, a pair of silver-haired sharks named Arthur Blackwood and Jonathan Miles. My invitation, delivered by a hand courier, was casual, citing a desire to discuss potential philanthropic synergies. They accepted. Of course, when Serafina Covington invites you to lunch, you do not decline. It is not a social invitation, it is a summons. I arrived first, taking my preferred table in a quiet, secluded alcove. When they arrived, I greeted them with the warm, effortless charm I reserved for high-stakes negotiations. We exchanged pleasantries, discussed the market in broad philosophical terms, and ordered our food. I let the conversation drift, allowing them to feel at ease, to feel like this was a meeting of equals. Only when the coffee was poured did I subtly pivot to the true purpose of the meeting. Arthur, Jonathan, I began, my voice a confidential murmur. I must confess I did not invite you here solely to discuss charity. I find myself in a transitional phase. As you know, I am stepping back from the day-to-day operations of Covington Logistics. I am focusing on legacy, on ensuring the long-term stability of my family's capital. I saw a flicker of intense interest in their eyes. They smelled money. My current fund managers are competent. I continued with a dismissive wave of my hand. But they are creatures of the old guard. They are safe, predictable. They lack a certain innovative spark. The Covington Pension Fund is one of the largest private funds in the country. Its management is a significant piece of business. I am considering making a change. The air in our alcove suddenly felt electric. The Covington Pension Fund was the holy grail, a multi-billion-dollar prize that could secure their firm's dominance for a generation. We would of course be honored to be considered, Serafina. Blackwood said, his voice a low, hungry growl. I'm sure you would, I said with a small, knowing smile. But I am not looking for a firm. I am looking for an individual, a relationship. This is not just about numbers to me, it is about trust. I need an advisor who is not just brilliant, but who understands the unique dynamics of a family-run empire. Someone with vision, with daring, someone I can trust implicitly with my family's future. I let the words hang in the air, a glittering, irresistible lure. I watched as the same thought, the same name dawned on both of their faces. It's a funny coincidence, I said, as if the thought had just occurred to me, but my daughter's fiancé Damien Vance works for you, doesn't he? A remarkable young man, truly remarkable. The trap was sprung. Yes, Damien is one of our rising stars, Miles chimed in, his voice filled with a newfound proprietary pride. Rising star is an understatement, I said, shaking my head in feigned admiration. His grasp of the market, his forward-thinking strategies. He has been advising me informally on my personal finances. His insights are astonishing. He has a level of sophistication one rarely sees in a man his age. I could see the gears turning in their predatory minds. They now saw Damien not just as a competent employee, but as their personal key to the Covington vault. He was their inside track, their golden goose. His value to them had just increased 100-fold. They would protect him, they would promote him, they would give him anything he wanted because they believed he was their future. We have very high hopes for Damien, Blackwood said, his voice now filled with a sincerity that was entirely manufactured but utterly real to him. As you should, I said, gathering my things to leave. I will be in touch. I have much to consider, but I will say this, the quality of the advisor will be the single most important factor in my decision. I left them there, their minds reeling with the intoxicating possibility of the prize I had dangled before them. I had not promised them anything. I had not made any demands. I had simply planted a seed, The idea that Damian Vance was the most important asset their firm possessed. As my car pulled away from the club, I smiled. I had just constructed the pedestal. I had convinced the world of Damian's genius, of his value. Now all that was left was to give him the one thing that would make him climb onto it himself, willingly and with blind, reckless ambition. I needed to give him a taste of real power. The corporate gambit had secured Damian's professional flank, convincing his superiors that he was an indispensable asset. Now, I needed to close the circle, to bind him personally to my plan with a chain forged from his own ambition and my daughter's deepest desires. The perfect trap is not one the victim is forced into. It is one they beg to enter. I summoned Nia to the estate's botanical gardens, a place of profound personal significance for her. It was a vast, multi-acre glass conservatory that I had built for her 10th birthday, a living library of rare and exotic plants from around the world. She had spent much of her childhood here, and it was the one place where the walls between us had sometimes felt permeable. She arrived, her demeanor cautious. Our relationship since the disastrous meeting in my study had been one of sterile politeness. She saw me as a defeated, if still formidable adversary. I did not wait for her to speak. I met her at the entrance to the orchid house, the air thick with the sweet, heavy scent of blooming phalaenopsis. "Nia," I began, my voice imbued with a soft, maternal warmth I had not used in years. "I have been doing a great deal of thinking since our conversation, and I have come to realize that you were right." She looked at me, her eyes wide with suspicion and surprise. "You said you wanted a family built on love, not contracts," I continued, my gaze earnest. "You accused me of seeing the world in terms of assets and liabilities, and it has forced me to look at my own life, at my own failings as a mother. I have been so focused on building this empire, on securing our future, that I have forgotten how to simply be your mother." It was a masterful performance, every word, every gesture calibrated to disarm her. I saw the hard, defiant lines of her face begin to soften. "I cannot change who I am overnight," I said with a sigh of feigned regret, "but I can try to make amends. I know you feel adrift, without a purpose of your own. You have a brilliant mind and a compassionate heart, but you have no canvas on which to paint. I want to give you that canvas." I led her to a small, secluded bench, surrounded by a cascade of white orchids. "I have decided to establish a new charitable foundation," I announced, "the Nia Covington Foundation for the Arts. Its mission will be to provide scholarships and funding for arts education in underserved communities across the country. It is a cause I know you are deeply passionate about, and I want you to be its chairwoman, not in a symbolic role, but as its leader. You will have full autonomy, you will build it from the ground up, it will be your legacy, not mine." Tears welled in her eyes. This was her dream. A chance to make a real difference, to have a purpose that was entirely her own, separate from the cold, corporate world of Covington logistics. It was the ultimate validation, the ultimate gift. "Mother," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I said, placing a hand over hers. "Just accept it. But there is one condition." Her face tensed slightly. She was waiting for the catch, the inevitable string attached to my magnanimity. "This foundation will be a significant financial entity," I said, my tone shifting to one of serious practicality. "I will provide an initial endowment of $50 million. An endowment of that size requires expert, trustworthy management. It needs a financial advisor who is not just skilled, but who has a personal stake in its success." I paused, letting her connect the dots. "To build trust between us, Nia," I said, my voice heavy with meaning. "To prove that I am ready to let go, the foundation's endowment will be managed exclusively by Damian. It will be his responsibility to grow it, to protect it. It will be a partnership. Your vision and his financial acumen, together you will build something wonderful." The final lock clicked into place. I had offered her her dream, and I had made Damian the key to that dream. To refuse would be to admit she didn't trust him. To accept was to hand me a powerful new lever of control. The tears now flowed freely down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy, of reconciliation. "Thank you," she sobbed, throwing her arms around me. "Thank you, Mother." I held her, my expression serene, my mind cold as ice. She thought this was an act of love, a mother's atonement. She could not see that it was simply another, more elegant, more personal form of acquisition. The foundation was not a gift, it was a gilded cage, and I had just watched her and the man she loved walk into it. hand in hand, believing it was a paradise. The bait was set, the trap was sprung. All that was left was for their own ambition to do the rest. The creation of the Nia Covington Foundation for the Arts, coupled with the tantalizing prospect of the Covington Pension Fund, acted as a powerful accelerant on the fire of Damien's ambition. He was no longer just a financial analyst. He was a kingmaker, a philanthropist, a trusted advisor to one of the most powerful families in the world. He was in his own mind invincible. I watched from a distance as his entire demeanor shifted. The slick but slightly nervous ambition was replaced by an aura of absolute unassailable confidence. He was no longer trying to fit into my world. He believed he was its new center of gravity. His walk was more assured, his voice was deeper, his suits were now exclusively bespoke, a subtle but significant upgrade. He had stopped playing the part of a powerful man and had begun to believe in his own performance. His days became a whirlwind of activity. He held meetings with architects to design the foundation's new headquarters. He interviewed candidates for the foundation's board of directors, a process in which he grandly held court, dispensing his wisdom on how to best manage the Covington gift. He was the star of his own show, and Nia was his adoring, grateful audience. She saw his confidence as a sign of his brilliance, his command of the situation as a testament to his strength. She was blinded by her own happiness, by the dream I had so carefully crafted for her. This newfound status had a predictable effect on Damien's professional life. His senior partners Blackwood and Miles now treated him not as an employee but as a peer. They deferred to his judgment, they sought his opinion, they included him in meetings that had previously been far above his pay grade. They saw him as their conduit to my billions, and they were willing to give him anything he wanted to keep him happy. He was given a corner office, a new, more impressive title, and most importantly a dangerous level of autonomy. And it was this autonomy that would prove to be his undoing. Behind the facade of the respectable, brilliant fund manager, Damien was still a gambler, a fraud playing a high-stakes game with other people's money. The pressure on him was now immense. He had to maintain the illusion of his own financial genius. The Covington Pension Fund, the foundation's endowment, these were massive prizes, but they also came with an unprecedented level of scrutiny. He knew that if he were to manage these funds, his own personal finances would have to withstand a rigorous due diligence process. And he knew his current situation was a house of cards. He needed to get rich, and he needed to do it fast. He needed to turn his mountain of hidden debt into a molehill, and his meager personal portfolio into something that looked respectable, stable, and worthy of a man in his position. He became reckless. Using his new, elevated status at the firm, he secured a larger line of personal credit, leveraging his future earnings against the promise of the Covington accounts. He poured this new capital, along with every last dollar he had, into the same high-risk, off-the-books commodity trades he had been using for years. But now the scale was different. He was no longer making small, desperate bets. He was making massive, company-risking wagers. He was convinced he had a foolproof system, that his analysis of the market was infallible. He was a man standing at a roulette table betting everything he had, and everything he didn't, on a single number, convinced the universe owed him the win. I received weekly reports from the Vespers, who were now monitoring his every financial transaction. I saw the credit lines being extended. I saw the massive wire transfers to his offshore accounts. I saw the huge leveraged positions he was taking in the coffee bean futures market. He was going all in, betting his entire fraudulent existence on a stable harvest. He was so consumed by his own ambition, so blinded by the glittering prizes I had dangled before him, that he never once stopped to ask the most important question. Why was all of this happening? Why was the great Serafina Covington, a woman known for her strategic genius and ruthless control, suddenly so accommodating, so generous, so trusting? He never asked the question because he had already supplied his own, ego-flattering answer. He believed he had beaten me. He believed he had won Nia's heart, and in doing so had won the keys to the kingdom. He saw me as a relic of the past, a fading power, and himself as the dynamic, brilliant future. He was a moth flying with joyous, reckless abandon, ever closer to a flame he himself had lit. The trap was no longer just set, he was actively, eagerly helping to build it around himself. The higher he flew, the more spectacular the fall would be, and I, the patient, silent architect of his ascent, was simply waiting for him to reach the perfect optimal height before I extinguished the flame and watched him plunge into the darkness. The time for observation was over. The time for action had arrived. Damien had been elevated, his ego inflated, his financial position leveraged to the breaking point. The house of cards was built as high as it could possibly go. Now it was time for a gentle, almost imperceptible breeze. My command bunker was the quietest place on earth, yet at that moment it was the epicenter of a storm that was about to break across the global commodities market. On the central monitor before me, two sets of data were displayed side by side. On the left was the public data from the New York Mercantile Exchange, showing the current stable price of coffee bean futures. On the right was my data, the proprietary real-time information streaming from the heart of the Covington logistics empire. My data told a different story. It was a mosaic of 1,000 small, seemingly unrelated facts that, when pieced together, painted a picture of imminent collapse. A satellite image showed the subtle telltale discoloration of a fungal blight spreading across a key plantation in Colombia. A shipping manifest from the port of Santos in Brazil showed a sudden, unexplained 20% drop in outgoing coffee shipments. An internal memo from one of my European regional managers reported chatter of a potential dockworkers' strike in Hamburg, a key entry point for coffee into the European market. To the rest of the world, these were isolated incidents. Background noise. To me they were a clear, unmistakable signal. The coffee market, which Damien had bet his entire existence on, was not stable. It was a bubble, and I was holding the pin. I did not need to do anything as crude as flooding the market or dumping stock. Such moves are noisy. Traceable. My methods are more subtle, more elegant. My power does not come from brute force, but from a superior understanding of the system's architecture. I control the arteries of global trade. A small temporary constriction in one of those arteries is all that is required. With a few keystrokes, I brought up the global allocation map for our refrigerated shipping containers, the lifeblood of perishable commodities like coffee. I identified a fleet of 20 ships scheduled to transport Brazilian coffee beans to North America and Europe over the next 3 weeks. Then, I began to issue a series of quiet internal directives. A ship bound for New York was rerouted to Asia to pick up a more profitable cargo of electronics. Citing a minor mechanical issue that would require a week of repairs, a batch of containers in Santos was flagged for a random customs inspection, a bureaucratic maneuver that would tie them up in port for a critical 10-day period. I approved a sudden generous pay bonus for our logistics coordinators in Hamburg, a move I knew would accelerate their ongoing behind-the-scenes labor negotiations and increase the probability of a short-term tactical strike. Each action was small, discreet, and perfectly justifiable from a business perspective. They were tiny, butterfly wing flaps in the vast complex ecosystem of global trade. But I knew that these small flaps, when combined, would create a hurricane. The effect would not be instantaneous. It would take a few days for the ripples to be felt. The delayed shipments, the tied-up containers, the labor dispute, they would create a perceived shortage in the market. Panic would begin to set in among the mid-level traders. The price would begin to fluctuate, then slide. And that slide would trigger the margin calls. This was the surgical strike. It was not a random chaotic market crash. It was a targeted precision-guided munition aimed at a single portfolio. Damien Vance's. The beauty of it was its anonymity. To the outside world, it would look like a natural market correction, a regrettable but unavoidable turn of events. No one would ever trace it back to a series of quiet commands issued from a sub-basement in a private estate. I leaned back in my chair, my work done. The commands were issued, the dominoes were set. All I had to do was wait. Upstairs, Damien was probably asleep next to my daughter, dreaming of his glorious future, of the billions he would soon control. He was a man standing on a beach, admiring the beautiful calm ocean, completely unaware that a tsunami, a wave of his own making that I had simply given shape and direction, was just over the horizon, about to come ashore and wash his entire world away. The first tremor hit on a Tuesday morning. It began not as a crash but as a flicker, a nervous tick on the screen of the commodities exchange. The price of coffee futures, which had been stable for weeks, dipped by a few cents. To most it was nothing. To a man as heavily leveraged as Damien, it was the first sign of a crack in the foundation of his world. I watched the unfolding chaos not from my own bunker but through the discreet real-time reports from the Vespers, who had compromised Damien's work and personal devices. I saw his world through his own eyes. I saw the frantic flurry of messages he exchanged with his offshore broker. Just market jitters, the broker wrote. Hold your position. By Wednesday the jitters had become a violent seizure. The news wires were buzzing with rumors. A fungal outbreak in Colombia. A shipping slowdown in Brazil. A potential labor dispute in Hamburg. My carefully planted seeds of chaos were sprouting, and the market was reacting with predictable panic. The price of coffee futures began to slide, then tumble, then plummet. Damien's screen became a waterfall of red, negative numbers. His confident, arrogant demeanor, as reported by my sources inside his firm, evaporated, replaced by a pale, sweaty-palmed terror. He spent the day locked in his office, chain-drinking coffee, his eyes glued to the screen, watching his life's ambition burn to the ground in real time. The margin call came on Thursday at 10:17 a.m. A margin call is a polite clinical term for a financial death sentence. It is a demand from a broker for an investor to add more funds to their account to cover their mounting losses. If they cannot produce the funds, the broker will forcibly liquidate their assets at a catastrophic loss to cover the debt. Damien received the notification via a stark, automated email. He needed to deposit $7 million into his account within 24 hours. $7 million that he did not have. He had leveraged everything. He had no reserves, no safety net. He was standing on a financial cliff edge, and the ground had just given way beneath his feet. The Vespers report gave me a second-by-second account of his implosion. I saw the desperate failed attempts to secure a short-term loan. I saw the panicked liquidation of his meager legitimate stock portfolio, which yielded only a fraction of what he needed. I saw the series of unanswered, increasingly hysterical calls he made to his wealthy friends, who, sensing the stench of failure, suddenly became unavailable. His professional world began to collapse simultaneously. His senior partners, Blackwood and Miles, who had been treating him like a king just days before, now looked at him with cold, reptilian eyes. They had heard the rumors of his catastrophic losses. They were not concerned for him, they were concerned for their firm's exposure, for the Covington pension fund they thought he was about to land. His value to them had been predicated on his success. Now, in the face of his spectacular failure, he was no longer an asset. He was a contagion. An emergency high-level meeting was called. I received a full audio recording from a listening device. The Vespers had planted in the boardroom. The transcript was brutal. Blackwood and Miles tore into Damien demanding a full accounting of his personal trading activities. They accused him of reckless endangerment of the firm's reputation. They placed him on immediate indefinite leave and launched a full internal investigation. The investigation, I knew, would be the final nail in his coffin. It wouldn't just uncover his recent losses, it would inevitably unspool his entire history of lies, his falsified resume, his stolen credit. They would discover that the rising star they had hitched their wagon to was in fact a black hole. By Friday morning, Damien Vance was a ruined man. He had lost his fortune, his career, his reputation, and his future. He was facing professional annihilation, public disgrace, and the very real possibility of legal action from his firm. He had flown too close to the sun, and his wax wings had melted, sending him plunging into an ocean of debt and deceit. He left his office in a daze, carrying his belongings in a cardboard box, a corporate cliché of total and absolute defeat. He had nowhere to go, he had no one to turn to, except of course to the woman he loved, my daughter, and through her back to me. The broken, defeated pawn was about to be returned to the Grandmaster's hand. The final phase of the game was about to begin. The call was not made to Damien. It was made to Nia. He would have been too proud, too broken to answer a call from my number. But Nia, my daughter, was a different matter. She was caught in the blast radius of his implosion, confused and terrified by the sudden violent collapse of the man she loved. She had spent the last 24 hours trying to comfort a ghost. Damien had returned to the penthouse, his face ashen, his eyes hollow. He refused to speak, to explain what had happened. He just sat in the dark, staring at the cityscape, a man completely disconnected from the world. Nia's calls to his office went unanswered. Her frantic texts to his colleagues received curt, evasive replies. She knew something terrible had happened, but she had no context for the disaster. It was into this atmosphere of fear and confusion that my call arrived. I had my assistant, a woman with a voice as smooth and cold as polished marble, place the call to Nia's personal cell phone. "Good afternoon, Miss Covington," the assistant's voice purred. "Mrs. Serafina Covington requests your presence, and the presence of Mr. Vance, in her study at the estate this evening at 6 o'clock. It was not a request, it was a summons. The language was polite, but the implication was as unyielding as a royal command. I received the transcript of their subsequent conversation, again courtesy of the Vespers. "It was your mother's assistant," Nia said, her voice trembling. "She wants us at the house, at 6. Damien, who had been silent for a full day, finally spoke. His voice was a dead, lifeless rasp. No. What do you mean, no? No, Nia pleaded. Damien, something is wrong. Maybe she can help. She can fix this. Whatever it is, she can't, he said, the words full of a despair so profound it was almost a physical presence. No one can. We have to go, Nia insisted, her fear making her strong. I'm not going to just sit here in the dark while our lives fall apart. We are going. They arrived at the estate at precisely 6 o'clock. They were met at the door not by me, but by my head of security, a large, silent man who radiated an aura of quiet intimidation. He escorted them without a word to my study, the same study where, just a few weeks earlier, they had so confidently announced the terms of their new regime. The atmosphere this time was profoundly different. The room was dimmer than before, the curtains partially drawn against the setting sun. I was seated behind my desk, not with a serene smile but with an expression of cold, dispassionate neutrality. The chair where Damien had sat, the one from which he had presented his spreadsheets, was empty. The armchair where Nia had sat was now occupied by a severe-looking man in a dark suit, holding a leather-bound portfolio. He was the chief counsel of the Vespers, my silent, invisible army. Nia and Damien were not offered a seat. They were made to stand before my desk, like prisoners before a judge. The illusion of a negotiation was gone. The pretense of a family discussion had been stripped away. This was not a meeting, this was a sentencing. Nana looked from me to the strange man in the chair, her confusion deepening. Damien, however, seemed to understand. He did not look at me. He stared at the polished surface of my desk, his shoulders slumped in a posture of utter and complete defeat. He knew on some deep primal level that he had not just stumbled into a trap. He knew he was standing in the presence of the architect of his own ruin. He knew this was the end of the game. I let the silence in the room stretch, allowing it to become a physical weight, pressing down on them. Nia fidgeted nervously, her eyes darting between me and the silent, imposing lawyer. Damien remained unnervingly still, a statue of a broken man. Finally, I spoke. My voice was not angry, not triumphant. It was the calm, measured tone of a scientist presenting a set of irrefutable findings. Thank you for coming, I began, my gaze fixed on Damien, though I was speaking to them both. I believe there are some matters that require clarification. I gestured to the lawyer. This is Mr. Kincaid. He is the head of a research firm I employ. They have been compiling a report on your professional and personal history, Damien, for due diligence purposes, of course. Given your new intimate role in my family's finances, I'm sure you understand the necessity. Damien's head jerked up, a flicker of panic in his dead eyes. Now looked utterly bewildered. A report? What are you talking about, mother? I ignored her. Mr. Kincaid, I said, please begin with the academic summary. The lawyer opened the leather portfolio on his lap. His voice was a dry, precise monotone, the voice of a man reading an obituary. Damien Vance, graduated from Northwood University with a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration. Official GPA 3.2. This is contrary to the 3.9 summa cum laude distinction listed on the curriculum vitae submitted to his current employer. Furthermore, we have a sworn affidavit from the Registrar of the London School of Economics, confirming that Mr. Vance never participated in their summer internship program in 2015. A key credential listed on the same Nia gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at Damien, her eyes pleading for a denial. He offered none. He just stared at the floor. Continue, Mr. Kincaid, I said. Professionally, the lawyer droned on. Our research indicates a pattern of intellectual property appropriation. We have statements from 2 former colleagues detailing how Mr. Vance repeatedly took credit for their analytical work on the Henderson and Silver Creek accounts, leading to his promotion in 2021. Financially, Mr. Kincaid continued, turning a page. Mr. Vance maintains 3 undeclared offshore entities in the Cayman Islands, through which he has been conducting a series of highly leveraged, unauthorized trades in commodity futures. As of this morning, these accounts carry a negative balance of approximately $8.4 million. This constitutes a catastrophic personal bankruptcy and a significant violation of his firm's compliance and ethics policies. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling the entire edifice of the man my daughter thought she knew. The brilliant prodigy, the self-made man, the financial genius, it was all a lie. A fabrication. That's enough, Mr. Kincaid, I said softly. The lawyer closed the portfolio with a soft, final snap. Nia was now openly weeping, silent tears streaming down her face. "Damien," she whispered, "is this true?" He finally looked at her, his face a mask of shame and despair. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was then that I delivered the masterstroke. "You see, your personal financial implosion was not just a matter of bad luck, Damien," I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I slid a document across the desk towards him. It was a single page, a printout of my proprietary shipping data from 3 weeks prior, showing the first signs of the coming coffee market collapse. He stared at it, his eyes slowly widening in horror as he understood what he was seeing. This was data he had never had access to, data no one in his world could have possessed. "The market did not correct itself," I explained, my voice as gentle as a surgeon's scalpel. "I corrected it. Your ruin was not an accident, it was a business decision. I analyzed your vulnerabilities, and I executed a targeted strategic strike. I built your pedestal, and then I kicked it out from under you." The final horrifying truth dawned on his face. He had not been a player in a game against the market. He had been a pawn in a game against me. A game he had never even known he was playing. The dossier had exposed his past. This single sheet of paper proved my absolute, terrifying control over his present and his future. He looked at me then, and for the first time I saw not arrogance, not ambition, not even despair. I saw pure unadulterated fear. The fear of an animal that has finally understood the true nature of its captor. The truth in its full brutal totality settled over the room, sucking the very air from it. Nia's quiet sobs were the only sound. Damien stood, utterly exposed. A man whose past, present and future had been systematically dismantled before his eyes. He had no defenses left, no lies to hide behind. He was a king in checkmate, his board cleared of every piece but his own. It was time to offer him the terms of his surrender. "You have 2 paths before you, Damien," I said, my voice calm and conversational as if we were discussing a simple business proposal. "Path A is the one you are currently on. Your firm's internal investigation will conclude within the week. They will uncover everything Mr. Kincaid has just outlined, and more. You will be fired, of course. Then you will be sued for breach of contract and gross negligence. The SEC will launch its own investigation into your unauthorized trading. You will be facing public disgrace, financial ruin, and given the scale of your fraud, a not insignificant prison sentence. Nia, of course, will leave you. Your life, as you know it, will be over." I let that sink in, a chillingly precise and accurate prediction of his fate. "Then," I continued, a magnanimous tone creeping into my voice, "there is path B, my path." I leaned forward, my hands clasped on the desk. "On path B none of that happens. Tomorrow morning your firm's investigation will be quietly terminated, due to a lack of evidence. The senior partners will be informed that your recent losses were the result of an unforeseeable and blameless market anomaly. All of your personal debts, all $8.4 million of them, will be absorbed by a private trust I control. Your name will be cleared. Your reputation will be restored. You will be saved from ruin and from prison. You will be given a clean slate." Damien looked up, a desperate drowning man seeing a lifeline, but he knew as I did, that the lifeline was a leash. "And what do you want in return?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Everything," I replied, my voice a soft silken purr. "In return you will belong to me. You will resign from your current firm, effective immediately. You will accept a new position as the head of a new internal finance division at Covington Logistics, a division I am creating specifically for you. Your salary will be generous, but your trades, your investments, your every financial decision, will be made with my direct approval. You will become my asset, my wholly owned subsidiary." I turned my gaze to my weeping daughter. "You will of course still marry Nia. The wedding will proceed as planned. It will be the society event of the season. You will live in the home I choose for you. You will take the vacations I approve. You will present a perfect, happy, successful image to the world. An image that I will own, that I will curate, that I will control." The full, horrifying scope of my proposal became clear. I was not just offering him a job. I was offering him a new identity, a new life, one in which he would be a gilded prisoner, a puppet whose every string I held. I was saving him from one prison only to place him in another, more comfortable but infinitely more inescapable one. "This is insane," Nia choked out, looking at me with a mixture of horror and betrayal. "You can't do this. This isn't a business deal. This is our life. On the contrary, my dear, I said, my voice losing its gentle tone and hardening into steel. This is the ultimate business deal. I am making a significant investment to acquire a distressed asset, Demian, and to protect my primary asset, you. I am simply dictating the terms of the merger, and my terms are non-negotiable. I stood up, signaling the end of the audience. You have until morning to decide, but the choice really is no choice at all. Path A is annihilation, Path B is survival. Your survival, Demian, is now entirely in my hands. I looked at him, at this broken, fraudulent man who had dared to challenge me. His shoulders were slumped. The fight was gone. He was facing a choice between complete destruction and a life of luxurious servitude. It was no choice at all. He knew it. I knew it. He would sign the contract. He would take my deal. He would become mine. Demian, as expected, accepted the terms. He had no other move. The choice between annihilation and a gilded cage is, for a man like him, no choice at all. The instinct for self-preservation, especially when sweetened with the promise of continued luxury, is an overwhelming force. The transition was executed with the swift, silent efficiency of a corporate merger. The day after our meeting, Demian tendered his resignation. The internal investigation at his firm was, as I had promised, quietly and inexplicably dropped. A week later, a press release announced the creation of the new Covington Global Strategies Division, with the brilliant young financier, Damian Vance, appointed as its inaugural president. The market applauded my forward-thinking move to bring new blood into the old empire. His debts vanished, absorbed into the labyrinthine depths of my private trusts. His past was erased, his future rewritten according to my design. The wedding, 3 months later, was the spectacle I had ordained. It was held in the gardens of the estate. A breathtaking affair with a guest list that read like a global power index. Nia was a vision in a custom-made gown, her beauty a tragic, fragile mask. She moved through the day like a ghost, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. She was playing her part, the happy, blushing bride, but I could see the truth, the joy she had felt just months earlier, the belief that she was finally escaping my control, had curdled into a permanent low-grade despair. She understood now that her bid for freedom had not just failed, it had resulted in the permanent enslavement of both herself and the man she had believed was her liberator. Damian, for his part, was a flawless groom. He was charming, attentive, and eloquent. He laughed in all the right places. He delivered a moving toast to his beautiful bride and his visionary mother-in-law. But I, who owned him, could see the hollowness behind his performance. The confident, predatory spark in his eyes was gone, replaced by the watchful, cautious gaze of a man who is constantly being monitored. He was a king in a play, granted all the trappings of power, the title, the respect, the wealth, but with no real agency of his own. His every move was dictated by my script. Their life together became a curated performance of happiness. I purchased a magnificent townhouse for them in the city, a beautiful historic home that I had renovated to my exact specifications. I chose the art for their walls, the furniture for their rooms, the staff for their kitchen. I approved their vacation destinations, a quiet, respectable trip to the south of France, not the flashy, vulgar Dubai trip they had once dreamed of. I managed their social calendar, ensuring they were seen at the right galas, seated at the right tables, photographed with the right people. I did not rule them with overt commands. My control was more subtle, more insidious. It was a system of gentle suggestions, of quiet approvals, of unspoken expectations. I had created a perfect, frictionless world for them, a paradise of effortless luxury. But it was a paradise whose walls were invisible but absolute. They had everything they could ever want, except the one thing they had tried to take from me, control over their own lives. The love they had once shared, the passionate alliance against the tyrannical mother, was poisoned. It was now a complex relationship of resentment, dependency, and shared captivity. Nia looked at Damian and saw not her hero but the man whose weakness had cost them their freedom. Damian looked at Nia and saw not the woman he loved, but the beautiful, unwitting bait that had led him into the most elegant and inescapable trap he could have ever imagined. They were beautiful, successful, and admired. They were also my prisoners. They lived in a magnificent, gilded cage, and they knew with a certainty that would haunt their every waking moment, that I, and I alone, held the key. They had tried to control my spending. I now controlled their very existence. The terms of the new contract were being honored, perfectly. A year passed. The new order became the established reality. Damien, under my direct and constant supervision, proved to be an effective, if uninspired executive. Stripped of his ability to engage in reckless gambling, his natural intelligence and ambition were channeled into the more predictable, profitable channels I laid out for him. The Covington Global Strategies division posted impressive, stable returns. He was a model employee, praised in the financial press for his meteoric, disciplined rise. He worked long hours, he followed my orders without question, and he never ever took an unauthorized risk. He was a perfect, tamed instrument. Nia, in turn, became the perfect society wife. She ran the charitable foundation with a quiet, sad dignity, its work a constant painful reminder of the peace offering that had sealed their fate. She was admired for her grace, her philanthropy, her impeccable taste, a taste of course that was subtly guided by my own. The fiery, rebellious spark that had once defined her was gone, replaced by a cool, placid resignation. She was a beautiful hollow doll, living in a beautiful hollow house. Their marriage, once a passionate rebellion, was now a quiet, functional business partnership. They were allies in their shared captivity, bound together not by love but by a mutual understanding of their predicament. They were polite, they were supportive, they were a perfect team, but the laughter, the intimacy, the spark of genuine connection, those had been casualties of my war. One evening I was in my command bunker conducting my annual review of my personal financial holdings. It was a ritual I performed with the same meticulous attention to detail that I applied to my corporate empire. I was reconciling my assets, categorizing my investments, and assessing my overall net worth. The monitors around me glowed with a river of numbers, a testament to a lifetime of strategic acquisition and ruthless control. I moved through the balance sheets, my fingers flying across the holographic keyboard. I categorized my real estate holdings, my equity portfolio, my collection of fine art, my private trusts. Then I came to the final section of my personal ledger. It was a category I had created myself, one that did not exist on any standard accounting software. It was labeled simply assets, intangible and proprietary. Under this heading I had listed the things whose value could not be measured in mere dollars, but in the currency of power and control. My political connections, my network of corporate intelligence, my control of key data streams. And then, I made a new entry. My fingers typed the words, the letters appearing in crisp white text on the screen. It was the final, logical step in the process that had begun with their foolish declaration of war. A year and a half earlier, it was the formal closing of the deal, the final entry in the ledger of my victory. Under the heading Assets, Intangible and Proprietary, I typed, Damien and Nia Vance. I paused, looking at their names, now officially logged, categorized and filed within the vast, complex architecture of my personal holdings. They were no longer just my daughter and my son-in-law. They were a line item, a subsidiary, a successfully acquired and fully integrated asset, performing exactly as designed. I saved the file, the system was balanced, the books were closed, the acquisition was complete. Thank you for watching.